I feel that there may be a danger that people are talking more to the people who think like them, and if they're not talking so much to the people that they're thrust together with, does that mean that they're less likely to be exchanging views with people with very different political or cultural values?
Welcome to A Third Place, a podcast about the importance of public spaces in the personal and professional development of prominent Australians. This series celebrates the 60th anniversary of the University of Melbourne's Baillieu Library as a special third place between home and work. I'm your host, Peter McPhee. In today's episode, I spoke with world-renowned ethicist and moral philosopher Peter Singer about places for discussion, debate, and sharing challenging ideas. Peter is currently Professor of Bioethics at Princeton University and a Laureate Professor at the University of Melbourne. He's authored a number of influential books, including Animal Liberation in 1975, and recently co-founded the Journal of Controversial Ideas. I began by asking Peter about his recollections of being an undergraduate and using the Baillieu Library.
I spent a lot of time browsing in the book stacks, and of course that's something that you don't do anymore now if you're looking at things online, but it was actually quite fruitful for me would be some book that I was assigned to read, I guess, but I spent a lot of time looking at what was around that area. So I was interested in ethics in the 170s. It was all the Dewey Decimal System, of course, and then I did history and spent a lot of time in the 940s as well. That's my strongest memory, I suppose. I had a girlfriend I used to meet at the Baillieu as well, I must admit, so it wasn't all work. That was another attraction.
Whereabouts in the Baillieu did you meet her? Did you have a special spot?
She was a science student, so I would go up to the science areas and meet her, but then we would go up to the back stairs and talk a little or kiss and cuddle a little maybe.
Oh, I had this image of you as a nerd, I must say, because everybody knew that Peter Singer was a very brilliant student. I thought that you would be hidden away in the corral somehow with stacks of books.
Look, I did work hard. I'm not saying I didn't, but it's not the only thing that I was interested in.
But you spent a lot of time in the Baillieu? Was it really a very significant part of your university life?
It was a significant part of my university life, yes. It was certainly the main work part. The other places, I suppose, that were significant was the cafeteria, which was rather different then. It was a place where there were long tables across the caf, as we called it, and if you went in at lunchtime, you knew who you would find there at particular tables, so you could join a group and talk to them. That was significant. For the philosophy department, Norton's, the pub across the road in Royal Parade, was significant because the nice thing about the philosophy department was that on Friday afternoons, the lecturers would go over there, as well as some of the students, the honours students or the graduate students. So you would have this discussion, this informal discussion, which was really good, and I think it's one of the things that led me to end up doing philosophy rather than history, that the philosophy department seemed less formal and more ready to chat about issues than people in the history department who kept more to their specialisation.
So, Peter, when we think about third places, we're not only thinking about places like the Baillieu Library as places of study and reflection, but we're also thinking about social spaces where people go for relaxation and to share ideas.
That's definitely right. So I would say the Baillieu, Norton's, the cafeteria, and the other factor that's relevant is I was for 3 of my undergraduate years a resident at Ormond College. So Ormond College also obviously had conversational spaces. In fact, there was a table of us who used to meet fairly regularly over dinner, which included Bill Garner, who was another philosophy student who was quite influential in my thinking. I also got to know Rod Kemp, who later became a minister in the Liberal government. Rod and I used to argue a lot about politics, but it was certainly a good conversation that we had. So, Ormond College was another significant place for me.
There's a story which is recounted in one of the official histories of the University of Melbourne about an extraordinary student protest in 1964 that actually involved some sort of sleepover in the Baillieu. And my understanding is that you were involved in that. Is that correct?
Yes, I was taking part in the protest. The library was threatened with funding cuts,
yes.
And it's interesting that the students were prepared to say, this is an important issue. I think, if I remember rightly, the cuts were going to lead to the end of overnight loans.
That's correct.
And overnight loans were very important because you borrow a book, take it home, then you had time to study it and read it, and otherwise you would have to not use that because I don't think we were photocopying at that stage. I can't remember exactly when we started to get cheap enough photocopies to copy things, but it was an important issue. So yeah, we sat in the library and spent the night there.
I think up to 100 students made that they were prepared to sleep overnight in the Baillieu to make the point.
I think at least that many, and they were more involved in the protest. I think they didn't all stay overnight. To put it in context, of course, we're talking about the 60s when there are a lot more student protests going on, particularly about the Vietnam War. And I was involved in a variety of protests. So the idea of protesting itself was not a strange thing. The idea of protesting on behalf of a library rather than on behalf of a great moral issue like a war perhaps was something different. But it was part of the more intense student politics that went on at that time. And if you were part of that and you had friends who were doing this, then it wasn't that difficult to take that further step of saying, okay, I'm going to stay in the library when it closes and we'll stay in and sleep over. And I've been really surprised in a way how until quite recently climate change has not evoked similar kinds of protests and civil disobedience, because this seems to me to be a huge issue. We are damaging our planet for existing people, but also for future generations, possibly for centuries to come. We are destroying large parts of the natural environment, which we also value. So there's a much bigger issue in a way than even an issue like the war in Vietnam, which was a big issue to us. And I've noticed that organisations like the Extinction Rebellion are now trying to wake people up to the seriousness of this and to organise civil disobedience. And I think that that's the right response. I do think that people should be more involved and more concerned about what our generation has done, but younger generations are continuing to do, it hasn't really changed, to other people on this planet, to animals, to nature, and to future generations.
There's a famous story about you at Oxford when you encountered meat sauce for your spaghetti, I think it was?
Yes. Okay. So it wasn't just my spaghetti. It was the fact that I was having lunch with a Canadian graduate student, Richard Keshen, who had asked whether there was meat in the sauce on the spaghetti because, this was British cooking in the early 70s. You couldn't really tell what was in the sauce. But he asked, and when he was told that it did have meat, he didn't take it. He took the other option, which was just a salad plate. And I took the spaghetti because salad wasn't going to be enough for me for lunch. And then later I asked him why he'd asked that question, what his problem was with meat. And this may seem strange today, but here I was 23 or something, 24 maybe, and I got through my university life. I'd never really met a vegetarian. I'd certainly never had a conversation about vegetarianism with anyone who in any way sort of just put it on a general ethical view. Maybe I'd met a Hindu who was a vegetarian, but that wasn't going to be something that I could really relate to. But Richard was the first vegetarian that I'd had a discussion about that. And it was pretty rare to be a vegetarian then. You were likely to be thought of as some kind of crank. So that's why that episode had such an impact on me. It led me to think about my own ethics and are they really compatible with the way animals were treated to be turned into the meat that was in that spaghetti sauce.
And of course, that resulted in a book which has been extraordinarily influential, I think, in 1975.
That's right. Animal Liberation was published in 1975, and I'm happy to say has never been out of print since.
And is that where you first encountered utilitarian philosophy? Was there a particularly influential person in philosophy?
The influential person in philosophy through whom I encountered utilitarianism, ironically, was H.J. McCloskey, who was a strong opponent of utilitarianism, perhaps best known for some of his counter-examples to utilitarianism.
And so it was when you became a graduate student at Oxford that you then encountered people who were really able to nurture that utilitarian interest that you had?
That's true. I was supervised by R.M. Hare, who is the professor of moral philosophy at Oxford, who was a kind of utilitarian, what's sometimes now known as a preference utilitarian, somebody who thought that utilitarianism is about maximising the preferences that people have or that they would have if they were thinking calmly and clearly. So, yes, it became, that was perhaps the first time that I had a supervisor who was sympathetic to utilitarianism rather than one who was critical of it. But I should say, in fairness to McCloskey, that he recognised the value of my work and, he didn't only give credit to people who shared his views, as philosophers should never do. He recognised, I guess, the strength of the arguments I was putting up and was an excellent mentor to me in developing my philosophical arguments at Melbourne too.
So, Peter, you've been saying how important in your own personal development were third places, such as the Baillieu Library, the CAF, your residential college. Do you think that's changed for students today?
I do, yes. I think what's happened with the ability to communicate electronically with everybody anywhere is that they're spending more time doing that and less on the people who they are physically with. And I think that's been noticed at American universities like Princeton as well, because there, of course, all of the students basically live on campus or very close to the campus and they're away from home. That's very much the American tradition. And so it used to be that they were then pretty cut off from their former friends and they would form all of these important friendships and spend a lot of time with other people who are on the campus. But studies have suggested that that's less true now because they are still in touch with all their former friends through social media, and it's less central to them to make friendships with the other people that they're physically with.
And do you think that's affected the nature of conversations that students have?
I feel that there may be a danger that people are talking more to the people who think like them, and if they're not talking so much to the people that they're thrust together with, does that mean that they're less likely to be exchanging views with people with very different political or cultural values? That's possible, I think. That's this siloing effect that people talk about. And I remember sort of a lot of vigorous political debate, not only, as I said, what I had at Ormond with people like Rod Kemp, but I was involved in student politics. I was working for Farrago as eventually became a sort of assistant editor, and that involved you in student politics and the Students' Representative Council and so on. I'm not sure that that's as important in university life as it used to be, and that also seems to be a pity.
So, Peter, it seems to me that certainly the major topics of discussion and debate on campus have changed over the decades, and that today there are more likely to be angry exchanges about discourse, even the need for trigger warnings. And I wonder how you feel about that.
Well, I'm not really a supporter of safe spaces where people do not have to risk being challenged in their ideas or possibly even being offended or disturbed to some extent. Obviously, there are limits to this. I'm not saying that there should be safe spaces for racial hatred or anything like that. There should not be safe spaces for ideas, ideas that are presented, calmly and rationally and with arguments and with evidence. And that's why I and my colleagues are co-founding the Journal of Controversial Ideas. We feel that some academics, particularly junior academics, can now be intimidated by an atmosphere in which they fear that they could ruin their careers if they take on certain controversial topics. And so we're going to offer them the opportunity to write anonymously for the journal if they wish to do so. We hope most people will be prepared to put their names to articles. But if they don't want to, they can publish anonymously. If later they decide it's okay or they want a selection committee for a job they've applied for to know that they were the author of this article, then we will be able to inform the selection committee or others. So it keeps those options open, but it means that we hope people will be able to publish without fear of intimidation or that kind of online abuse that you can get if you put controversial ideas out there.
Peter, you spoke earlier about the importance of your own personal development as a student and your engagement with ideas that were conflicting, different, challenging. And I'm wondering whether you think we still need to encourage students, perhaps even more, to participate in that sort of environment. Is that an idea that we should pursue?
I'd like to see that idea respected a lot more, that people are willing to go to other people's events. I went recently to an event at which a number of people, feminists, were questioning the proposal in Victoria for self-ID of gender and saying, what will this do to spaces that have been exclusive to women? And outside that event, when I went there was a protest, and a couple of people asked me why I was going. And to me, the question was, well, why were they not going? Wouldn't they actually want to hear what the arguments against their views were, even if they come out convinced that those arguments are mistaken? I think it's important for people to be not just standing outside saying this meeting shouldn't take place, but saying let's go to the meeting, let's ask probing questions, let's try to show why the arguments that we object to are mistaken. And that's much more productive than simply saying these people shouldn't be speaking on campus.
Thanks for listening to A Third Place. I'm your host, Peter McPhee. Today's episode is brought to you by the Baillieu Library and Learning Environments at the University of Melbourne. It was produced by Chris Parlow and Phil Shaw. Recorded by Gavin Neighbour at the Horwood Recording Studio. Edited by Phil Shaw, David Withers and Catherine Hayhoe. Rory Mullen is our intern, and our associate producers are Andrea Hurt and Ashley Sutherland for the Baillieu Library, and Eileen Wall for Learning Environments.